Let me just address that point. It was what's the name of the person who just asked that? Because I think
Keith.
that was
Keith,
directed
yeah.
specifically
Yeah.
at me, and there was somebody else as well, was there?
No, just Keith.
Oh, just Keith. Okay, so there's a lot of things to say. I'm going to address Keith directly as well. It does not make political sense for me to go ahead and back the invasion of Iraq. I've got no axe to grind whatsoever. I'm here in the UK. I wasn't necessarily a supporter of George W. Bush. I was not a voter or a supporter of New Labour or Tony Blair.
Nor was I. Just want to add that.
Okay. So therefore, I've got absolutely no axe to grind on this. And those, by the way, who are, tend to stay very quiet on this issue, even though they still think that it was the right thing to do. But I'm going to stick my neck out and try and defend what it is that I said, because I do believe that there are perhaps a minority, but I do believe there are people who believe what it is I'm about to say. And that is, and it just means casting your mind back. And I understand that there is chaos in the Middle East, and there's lots of problems in Iraq. I still say that you cannot blame that on the West, and you cannot blame that on the UK. And just give me just a couple of moments to explain what I mean on this. Saddam Hussein, we all agree that he was a mass murderer, not a very nice man to take home to meet your mum and your family and your wife and your kids and have a cup of tea with the chap.
Probably killed them all.
In fact, on the contrary, however bad he was, his two sons were much, much worse as well, because when you're brought up in all that power and corruption and money, then you can do what it is that you do. And they did some horrible things to girls who they picked up and had them killed at their own palaces afterwards as well. The Reader's Digest wrote about a number of these stories. I'm not going to bring it up right now.
Yeah,
but specific. Sorry?
Uday was one of them, wasn't he?
Yeah, that was one of his names. But Saddam Hussein is probably responsible for the deaths of more than 3 million Muslims. Okay, that's fine. Well, it's not fine, it's not okay, but nevertheless you might say it's still nothing to do with the West. Well, I say that number, let's just go through this. More than 1 million killed from the Iranian war, which went on for 8 years. That's how it was estimated when he attacked Iran. He attacked the Shiites, he attacked the Kurds inside of Iraq, who were also his own people as well. And he used weapons of mass destruction against his own people. He used mustard gas. He had nerve gas. He worked with Bashar. At the time, it was his father, Hafez al-Assad,
Yes,
who is the country that mass-produced chemical warfare in Syria. And that was one of the big problems when Assad lost power over a great deal of his country, that the Islamists were going to get these weapons, and they have got some of them because they're using them against certain areas. So it's not the fact that weapons of mass destruction were not found. He had them. He used them. We know that. He even used them against Iranians on the border towns. I remember watching a news report on the BBC which was specifically looking at families, young families, women and children who were dying a terrible death after 2 or 3 days, lying on the ground, and this mustard gas was eating away at their skin. And they couldn't move, but they were dying this terrible death after 2 or 3 days. That was as a direct result of Saddam Hussein of Iraq and weapons of mass destruction. He had all of these materials. He had them in a very, very large way. So when it came to the fact several years later in a post-9/11 era, when the whole world had changed, when Osama bin Laden was on the run, when Islamic fundamentalism was growing throughout the Middle East, when they were attacking and blowing up places in Africa, West targets, in Asia, in the Middle East, when you had the radical Islamic Hamas organization, Islamic Jihad, the Palestine resistance movement as well, Hezbollah growing more and more confident with the backing of Iran, that you had this growing jihadi organization. Yes, Saddam Hussein was secular at the same time, but nevertheless, Saddam Hussein had those weapons. Now what happened to them? Well, there's a theory on that. Intelligence says that they were transferred over the border into Syria. I don't know whether that was true or not. Maybe he blew them up. Maybe he buried them somewhere. Look at Iraq on the map. It's a vast amount of desert. It could have been taken anywhere, dug up, stuck down there and covered over. We don't know that. What we do know is he killed his people, he attacked 4 countries, and he used weapons of mass destruction. And to play around with the IAEA for several years, they could come, they couldn't come, they could come, they couldn't come, they got off the plane, they went to a unit, they couldn't go to another unit. You couldn't take chances anymore in a post-9/11. And just finally, I've said this before on this show, or one of the other shows, and that is that I believe that the Middle East would look a lot worse if Saddam Hussein was still in power today. We know how bad the Middle East looks today, and I know what it is that I'm saying. I think Osama bin Laden would have been invited into Iraq with his al-Qaeda movement. They would have been allowed to have stayed in the country. Saddam Hussein would have thought that he would have been in control of it. Eventually the monster would have got too big. He probably would have been destroyed. They would have taken over, but he would have invited him in. And that's the reason why Saddam Hussein had to go. Have I just got one more response to that? Because I have a feeling that this is just
very quickly, because I think we're coming to the outbreak, James.
Very quickly, and that is the reason why you had all that inter-fighting in Iraq afterwards, the Shiites and the Sunnis. It was believed that because Saddam Hussein killed both of them, both of those tribes, that they would join together. The reason why they didn't join together is because of al-Qaeda, who came into the country from Syria, and they planted these suicide bombings in the Shiite mosques. And the Iranians sent in their militias from Iran, the Shiites, to do the same to the Sunni mosques. And it ended up causing this hatred, which was on purpose by the Shiites and the Sunnis, where they hated each other. That was not the West's fault. Now, you could argue that the intelligence should have shown that. Fair enough. I will give you that. You can argue that perhaps things were not in place after the war. Yeah, we can talk about that as well. But Saddam Hussein had to go.
Absolutely.